Cool.
Welcome back to another episode of the Healthy with Heartland podcast. I am your host, Justin, and I am joined today with your favorite creative directors, Simon and Shannon. We have a very, very special guest today, Matt Maier from Thousand Hills. He is the head farmer, owner, all that good stuff. Very excited to speak with him about some of the products that we get from them. Before we get to that, though, let's send it over to Simon and Shannon for some announcements.
Good morning, Heartland family. It's so great to see everyone again this Thursday. Thanks again for tuning in. If you're a Heartland customer, we have an awesome reorder special for you this month. You can restock from home without the hassle, so check that out. It's one box of marinated chicken, absolutely free with your order, and we have lots of amazing flavors to choose from. So definitely make sure that you take advantage of that. In other Heartland news, if you're not, make sure you go ahead and join our Heartland Foodies group. We would love to hear what's for dinner, hear from you into what your family's enjoying, share in the community that is Heartland Foods. And as always, make sure you're tuning in every Thursday, 9:30 a.m. for our podcast. You can always catch those recaps on YouTube. Check us out on Facebook weekly. And with that, Justin, let's get into the podcast.
All right, everybody give a very warm welcome for Matt Maier. How you doing, Matt?
Just fine, thank you. Glad to be with you.
Awesome. So we have so many questions, so much to talk about. But I guess, tell us a little bit why you're known as the Regenerative Renegade and the whole concept behind Thousand Hills. Yep.
Yeah, sure. Well, we are staunch practicers of regenerative agriculture, and we have been since our founding in 2003. So I guess that's 18 years ago already. Wow. And when we started, there wasn't even a term for our practices. We said things like beyond organic and sustainable, and of course, true grass-fed with cattle on the land. But we're up against the industrialized, big ag, cheap food. I don't know if it's a movement, but machine that's in place. Mm-hmm. And so we really feel like we are at Renegades, and we need to have a renegade mindset, just like all of your consumers, that are concerned about the food they're eating, where it's coming from, how clean is it? Because we wouldn't exist without individual consumer renegades asking the questions and expecting more out of their food and their food system.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely. That's so true.
And that's one of the big things we talk about on this podcast, and that's why it was so great, and we were so appreciative that you were able to join us.
Definitely.
Because that's something that here at Heartland Foods, we also are trying to create that same movement, aligning ourselves with a regenerative agriculture renegade like yourself. But the one thing I kind of wanted to get into, and that is super important to us, is your why, and why do you think that this movement, as far as like eating clean food and that kind of thing, what is your whole purpose? Like, why do you do this? Why are you so passionate about it, essentially?
Well, there's a couple different paths on that to answer that question. I'll start with the personal side. I grew up, I'm one of those people that grew up on a farm, decided on a small, really 120 acre hobby farm in central Minnesota. And we had multi-species. We were grass-based. We didn't know it, but it was just that we didn't have enough resources to buy inputs, really. So we learned how to do everything in a circular manner on the farm, using multiple species and manure and managing crop rotations and having a lot of grass for all the animals to graze upon. So I grew up in that environment, left the farm thinking this is the last thing I want to do because I want to earn a living where I can support myself. My dad had to work off the farm. He worked in a factory. My mom worked as a seamstress. And this whole hobby was kind of my full-time job when I was a kid, this hobby of dad's. And so I didn't see a financial return, and so I gladly went to college, but had this attraction to the food industry, kind of based in my agricultural background. So I went to go work for a food company. and then started a marketing company that worked with food companies, conventional food companies, and then had the opportunity to sell that business about the same time I was moving my family back to the farm, because I had realized, okay, I have a young family. I want them to have some of the values that I grew up with, if not a career, at least the values of being close to nature, being close to the land, a work ethic, family close by, and wanted them to experience that. Mm-hmm. Well, I had that time after selling the business to think about what I wanted to do next, and I really researched our food system and what had happened from the time in my youth to, let's say, this was right around 2000, 2005 in that area. And what I found was this big conversion to denigration, to petrochemical fertilizers, to pesticides and fungicides. And then I looked around the land that I grew up on, and I saw it right before my own eyes. It was degraded. That was propped up by nitrogen from petrochemical fertilizers, propped up with Roundup, GMO plants. And about that time, I experienced, or a few years later after that, I experienced cancer. My mom and dad had both had cancer. And even though we didn't handle the chemicals, we were right in the environment of all this going on.
Right.
So that really got my attention. So between what I saw in the conventional food system, what I saw our agricultural land converting to, and then health and wellness, and what was going on with my health and the people around, the loved ones around me, I thought, okay, something's got to happen. Right. And I want to be a part of the solution. I don't want to sit on the sidelines. And in my research, this is going to be counterintuitive, but in my research, I found that a study or two that said the single biggest thing you can do to improve the food system is to regenerate the land. And the single fastest way to regenerate the land is to have ruminants managed holistically grazing on the land. Mm-hmm. So here this whole cow vilification thing is going on, and yet when we replicate what happened for who knows how many thousands of years on this country, in this land, that built this great breadbasket that feeds the world, was based upon ruminants. Part of the model is ruminants grazing on the land. I thought, hey, I did that when I was young. I know how to do that. I can do this. Okay. So I bought some cattle, bought some land from my dad, and started the journey of really using cattle as a way to regenerate our soil and our land, so that we may have the outcome of better food.
Wow. That's huge. I'm going to drop the bomb for that.
Oh, yeah. So we've learned so much from you and your practices, and we really believe in everything that you guys are doing. Yeah. But let's give our listeners and viewers a little insight into what the real differences are. When you add it all up, what is the real difference between your beef and, what's considered organic or grass-fed in the stores?
Well, yeah, we start to get into the different definitions of grass-fed beef, and I'll start with the USDA definition. And their definition is more of what I would say, scientific in a way, definition, in that if it is not starch, but it is a fiber or a grain byproduct and is fed to the animal, that fiber is considered forage, and so then that forage qualifies to be 100% grass-fed. Mm. Now, that doesn't take into consideration how they take in that, how they're fed that. So they could be fed in a feedlot, a GMO grain byproduct from ethanol plants is the most common practice, because that's a cheap byproduct coming out of the ethanol plants or any distillery. Mm-hmm. And that can be fed to the animals, never really seeing grass, and be called 100% grass-fed beef by the USDA. So that's one path that we absolutely do not want to be a part of, because I do not want to be part of anything that is considered conventional agriculture that's got us into the state that we're in.
Right.
Which, by the way, when people talk sustainability, we cannot shoot for, our goal cannot be sustainable, because we're in a bad state in general in our agricultural land. And if we sustain where we are, we're going to continue to be in a bad state. And that's why regenerative is so important. So we need to regenerate the land. So to me, part of our brand is lifetime grazed. We don't get the benefits of the land and the water infiltration and the topsoil building and the carbon sequestration, all the many benefits that we have with holistic planned grazing. You don't get that when when the cattle are confined and fed, right? They have to be on the land. They have to be grazed. Okay, so another type of grass-fed beef would be to say that it's pasture raised or pastured or free range or some words like that, which mean absolutely nothing. All cattle start off on grass. Basically, their mama cow has a calf out on the range somewhere in a pasture that it drinks milk from its mother, and it eats grass alongside of its mother. It's the cheapest form of production to produce a calf. It's good. But then when that calf is somewhere around 6 to 9 months old, it's taken off the cow. It's called backgrounded for a while, where maybe it gets some grass and some grain. And then after that, it goes into a feedlot. So you can have the majority of the life of the animal still be on grass, but then completely wreck it in the last 100 days in a feedlot with given synthetic hormones, given subtherapeutic antibiotics in its feed, and given grain, which is a completely unnatural diet for a ruminant that has 4 stomachs to break down cellulose and fiber in grass. One of the very unique animals that can do that. Mm-hmm. So you got to watch out for pasture raised or loose definitions. Just grass fed without the 100% in front of it really means nothing. Wow. The rule was designed that you would put a percent in front of grass fed of the amount of diet that animal had for its lifetime that was truly forage. So let's just say it was 14 months old and put into a feedlot, or 10 months old and put in a feedlot, and it lives to be 16 to 18 months. You can do the math. You could end up with like a 74% grass fed. Well, nobody does that on their label. Nobody wants to say 74% grass fed. Right. So the looser definition is just to say grass fed without a percentage in front of it. And then it means that sometime in its life that animal has had some grass, which is true of all conventional beef. But those are the bigger areas to look at. So as a consumer, that's really confusing. I mean, I can barely keep it straight. And I can barely look at a package, and sometimes I can't even determine how the production practices that went into that package. So I just encourage people, you really need to look at the protocol. You need to look for brands that have the values that you have. Right. You need to look at where those practices are, and you need to shop with organizations like yours that's doing the vetting for the consumer, because there's no way that a consumer can vet every category of food that they're eating. It'd be more than a full-time job. You have to research the outlet that you're buying from and find out what their practices and what their values are, so that you can then trust what you're buying from them.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
First, we appreciate that. And then second, on that exact topic of like vetting the process and this and like the farming and all that whole aspect, if there was somebody that was going to go out and try to vet the process and ask a farmer, it's like they'd have to know which questions to ask, right? What is your insight on that? Like, if they are going out and researching and trying to find farms, what is that one question that would tell you that, yes, this farmer is doing it the right way? Because not all consumers are going to know what to look for.
Well, in the area of grass-fed beef, there's a couple of key questions. One, are the cattle ever fed grain? Ever? And if you say that in a non-defensive or non-attacking way, farmers in general are honest. They're going to tell you, well, okay, yeah, it gets a little grain at the end of its life, or no, we never give grain. And getting a little grain at the end of its life is not good. It still upsets their chemistry of their body, and that affects their fats and their omega-6s and omega-3 balance in their fat. So don't fall for the fallacy that a little bit of grain at the end of the life, because what is a little bit? How many months is that? It's our stance is it's either never, ever, or not. And that's it, black and white. The other question that I would ask is, do you grow any GMO plants or grains on your farm? Any GMO plants or grains? And the reason why that is key is to grow a GMO plant, which alfalfa. The reason why I say plant is alfalfa has GMO varieties now, and so you could graze and not feed grain, but still have GMO alfalfa. And the only reason why you would have GMO alfalfa is that you would want to spray. You would be spraying to get rid of all the weeds, and that would be Roundup. And Roundup, as I'm sure you've seen, there's plenty of lawsuits about the carcinogen nature of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. So GMOs are really key. You'll know a lot about a farmer if they say, well, yeah, I've got a few fields of GMO, or they say, no, that never gets on our farm.
Right. Huge. Yeah. The other question I have on that topic is, when you talk about regenerating soil, and they start to, I guess, grow GMO vegetables and all kinds of, just GMO food in general, and then you're trying to regenerate this soil. How long and what is the process like in doing that?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. So in my little community project here, I started with 35 acres that I bought from my dad. And then I went to all the surrounding landowners, which now is up to 13. It's small farm territory. So we got 13 landowners to make up about 800 acres of agricultural land that we're grazing and managing right now.
Wow.
And what we find when we're converting over the prevalent crops here are GMO corn and soy. We're also in a hilly, wooded lakes area of Minnesota, so there's a lot of wetlands. So there's always was some pasture land on every farm, and then there was some cropland on every farm. And when we rent the farm, we rent it all. And in that cropland, we go in and do soil tests when we begin the lease. And what we find is that all of it's been tilled and farmed conventionally for, I don't know, since the 50s or so, 40s. That the organic matter, so just to zero in, organic matter is a really good measure of soil health. There's a lot of other things that we measure, but organic matter is the key. And we'll invariably find that there's about 1% organic matter in this land that we take over. Okay, so healthy soil needs about 5%. And you can go as high as 10 if you're really, really doing a great job over a long period of time. You can get to as high as 10. So we start at 1. And if you manage the land regeneratively without cattle, it'll take at least twice as long, so 10 to 20 years to grow 3 or 4% to get it to a healthy state. Wow. But if you introduce animals like we do, we can go from 1 to 5% in about 5 to 7 years, depending on the type of soil that we're starting with. So it exponentially increases the rate that you can turn that soil around. And there's reasons why. Obviously they're fertilizing in multiple ways, but the hoof action has an effect. The saliva from their mouth, we have found, positively affects the microbiological activity in the soil. So there's a lot of things that we don't understand about soil yet, and the interaction between animals and the environment and plants and the diversity of plants we've learned rapidly increases regeneration. And when you kind of step back 30,000 feet, let's say, you step back, we're really mimicking what nature does on her own. Right. We're introducing animals, and you know, there was millions of bison on this land as well as other ruminants. We're introducing animals grazing in a similar way in a tight herd, high density, moved regularly once or twice a day, and we're managing it that way. We're introducing, when we plant these fields that have less than 1% organic matter, we put in a cocktail of 16 to 20 different varieties of plants, because there's a lot of interaction that happens in diversity of plants. So we do that. We introduce our mineral program, where we're putting minerals back into the animals that ends up into the land in a very concentrated form that's really healthy for them. So there's a process to it. And what gives me hope is that there's than what traditional science originally said. You know, the stats that were thrown out, to grow an inch of topsoil takes 50 to 100 years. If that were the case, we'd really be in trouble, because we don't have 50 to 100 years. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization came out just a couple of years ago and said we have 60 years of harvest left.
Oh my God.
Period. On our soil at our current rate of degradation. That's how much we have.
Wow.
That is wild.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, that's in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? That's amazing.
Yeah. I think everyone is, and I am so enjoying really hearing about this. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, it's really close to my lifetime, I can tell you that. So, you know, it really hits home when you start to near that age. You're
right.
Like, wow, that is one quick lifetime, and that's all we got left. And I got kids and grandkids that I'm worried about. You know, it just gets me up and gets me going every day. We need to turn this around.
Yep, absolutely.
That's so true.
So what do you think is the best way for us to convey this message? You know, if we're gonna just hit a couple key points to really just make awareness about this stuff, like what is the most ethical things, I guess, like that we need to address, so people can understand that it is very important how they vote with their dollars and why they need to buy from companies like us and to not be part of the commercial supply chain. Like, what are those couple things that we really need to drive home with people so that they'll take some action?
Yes.
Well, I wish I had one quick, simple answer, but there are different touch points for people that do get a reaction to get their attention, to really dig into the issue a little bit. You know, it's really popular to talk about the carbon in the atmosphere now, and we do have elevated levels of carbon in our atmosphere. Guess what? This type of agriculture, where you have the land covered, where you're not tilling and releasing carbon, where you have diverse plants, that sequesters carbon. We're a net sink in carbon through a life cycle analysis paid for by General Mills that is proven that this is a net sink, and that if we could convert a majority of our agricultural land to these types of practices, we would draw down the carbon that we need to draw down. We don't need all these crazy whiz-bang solutions. We just need plants going through the process of photosynthesis as early as they can in the spring with cool season grasses, throughout the year, and in the fall. We got to increase our green days, and regenerative agriculture does that. So carbon is one. I would say another path is health. Everybody knows someone with health issues, and the nutrition density of this type of product, where I was just talking to a researcher at Duke University the other day, and he is researching, and Europe is ahead of us on this research, but that actually the phytonutrients that we find in plants, when cattle eat those plants or ruminants eat those plants, that the phytonutrients follow through in the meat and end up in our body, which I think is super exciting. So the nutrition density, the amount of minerals and micronutrients in cattle that are grazed and managed this way is, so health is another path. And then there's the soil question in our current state of our industrialized agriculture, and voting against that and for something else.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition too. You mentioned, how it's important, the animals and the soil. And I think, your mission statement, Thousand Hills mission statement, is to nourish soil, plants, cattle, and people by holistically grazing cattle for a lifetime. And I think I was listening to a podcast that you had previously where you said it's like in that order as well, right? Like it starts with the soil and then it eventually gets to people.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, without soil, we have nothing, right? We need soil for civilization. And when we mess that up, we're just counting our days till our demise, really. So yes, I'm just looking out on a field here. We got some deer grazing in our grass that's just coming up now. I wish I could show you.
Wow.
They just came up right across the field here. I lost my train of thought there, but yes, it starts with the soil. And we have to have healthy plants, and if the cattle or whatever ruminants are eating those healthy plants, it ends up benefiting our health. Because we've seen and heard about the studies about the decline. Like if you just take an apple, in the last 60 years, that apple has lost 80% of its nutritional benefit due to our practices.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how can that help us? How many apples? So we have to eat 4 times as many apples to get the same benefit that we got with one. And the same is true of beef. The same is true of chicken. The same is true of anything that comes out of our traditional, conventional agricultural system.
True. And Matt, so I was kind of wondering your position. So, we have these conversations, with people all the time, and we talk about, eating sustainably raised foods and of course, looking at your structure of how, you guys regenerate the farmlands and things like that. And then there's always a response or a rebuttal to that where people are like, we don't have enough farmland or we don't have enough space to kind of feed the masses of people. That's why we have to go to commodity farm to be able to get this kind of food. What is your stance on that? What can you tell us about, essentially your goal as far as how much land and how much space and how that would actually even be possible?
That's another great question. I love that. Okay, there's 2 paths on that. One, the real simple answer is look at the degradation that's happening. Look at the outcomes. Look at the measurements of the soil. Look at the outcomes and the nutritional benefit of the food. Look at the foods that we're growing. We're growing corn and soy.
Right.
I mean, is that a balanced diet? Is that reflective of what we should be eating? Most of our corn goes into our gas tank. Well, I shouldn't say most. A large percentage of our corn goes into our gas tanks, and we burn up our soil in our gas tanks. Does that make sense? Another part of our corn goes into high fructose corn syrup. Is that good for our diet?
Nope.
And then another large percent goes into animals like cattle that weren't even designed to eat that, but it's a shortcut to get them to get fat faster so that we can kill them faster and make more money. Okay. So if you just kind of look at the big picture on that, it's like, why would we want to do any of those 3? Why would we want to put our soil in our gas tank? Why would we want to drink high fructose corn syrup or put it in any food? And why would we want to feed a diet to an animal that isn't designed to eat it? And yet that's our biggest. We have 100 million acres of corn in this country. Okay, that's one side. The other side is, I'll give you an anecdotal story here. So the government has a program called CRP, Conservation Resource Program, that pays farmers to set aside, quote, less desirable land for agriculture. Okay, so that land sits idle. And it's the farmers paid to let it sit idle. And, there's good intentions to that. It's supposed to provide wildlife habitat. It's supposed to stop erosion because usually it's hilly land, or there's something about the land that doesn't make it ideal for tilling in our conventional agriculture. There's some good intentions there. So we get opportunities in our community farm project here to start grazing land that has been in CRP, let's say for 10 or 20 years. The contract comes up, they say, hey, do you want to graze it? Pay me with the same as what the government's paying me, and you can graze it. All right, so we had one farm like that, and I measured this. When we first went in to graze it, we were able to graze 40 animals for 4 days on that farm. What happens when you let land go idle is that a couple of plants take over. If you don't allow animal integration into the land, in this area, smooth brome takes over, and that's about all that happens, and some brush grows. So it's not great wildlife cover. It's not great food for anything, really, but it's grass that cattle can eat. So I went in, and so fast forward 4 years, I was able to graze 120 animals for 7 days on that same land. So we went from 160 grazing days to 840 days. And we didn't put any other inputs in, other than we went through and no-tilled in some seed in the second year to get some more variety into the land, into the land base. So I say that because we have millions of acres in CRP that could be grazed, and it could be improved, and it could be made more diverse just by grazing it. And there was a study done that said if we took our CRP land and we grazed it, and we took our land that we grow corn on that ends up in a cattle feedlot as feed, and combined those two, we could produce as many cattle as we do that we do today, and completely eliminate our feedlots.
Wow.
So I'm only an expert in cattle and grass-fed beef, but it's a fallacy to say that we don't have the land to feed people this way. Now, the other fallacy is that we continue on the same path, we degrade, pretty soon we have nothing to eat, right? Mm. But as we're doing this process across this land that currently may be starting off with the 1% organic matter that I referred to, that we can build to 5 or 6 or 7% over time by managing it correctly, we can rebuild our land, make it more productive to feed ourselves over time, and repair it. So the byproducts of our repair we can eat, and we can produce more. So it's a big chemical fallacy to say that to feed the world we have to keep doing what we do. In fact, the opposite is true. We have to stop doing what we're doing, look at it differently, and look at it a way that regenerates our land and produces more food that's more nutrient dense without chemicals, and increase our production to feed the world through these practices. I passionately believe that we have to get that message out.
Absolutely. I just got chills. I was like, you were preaching to me. I was like, yes, this is it right here. Like, that's the message.
So good. I've been very quiet this episode. I just want to listen.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. And Matt, maybe real quick, you could just talk a little bit about, I know that Thousand Hills has a goal, and I think it was by 2022 to have over 1 million acres of land. So if you could just tell us maybe a little bit about, where you guys are at with that goal, because that's awesome.
Yes, we're currently at just over 500,000 acres that we're regenerating every day through our producers. We have 60 family producers across the U.S. Wow. So we're over 500,000. We actually, our goal is 1 million acres by 2025. Okay. And I don't know if we're going to achieve that or not, because what's happening that I didn't necessarily foresee is that as our producers' land gets more productive, they can raise more animals on it. And as they raise more animals, our acreage doesn't increase as fast, even though we're having a positive effect on the land. Wow. So our producers are really pushing us because they want to sell us more cattle because they're getting so much more productivity off their land
Wow.
without increasing their land base.
Wow.
So, but that's the goal. You will get there eventually.
Right.
And it's interesting to see, there's food companies out there now. There's regenerative agriculture is now, a great movement.
Right.
But General Mills, I think, has 1 million acres by 2030. Cargill has a 1 million acre goal. Tyson, they all have goals, and I'm glad that they're paying attention. I'm glad they're moving in this direction. We all need to do it together,
Right.
Regardless of our past. And I just think it's kind of fascinating that this little company that we run has a goal that's as big as theirs, and will do it in less time. I'm competitive, and I'm proud of that.
Absolutely.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yep. Perfect.
Well, Matt, I mean, we just wanted
We
to
could talk about this all day, really.
Yeah, we could just go on, and we're having such an amazing time just listening and learning from you here. But, we know that you're busy, and we appreciate you taking your time out to, come and speak with us and all of our families. We know where they're super interested in hearing what you have to say. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, one quick question before we let you go. So from Minnesota, are you a hockey fan?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we actually have a pretty awesome hockey player here with us.
Yes, you could say that.
You do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Wild are doing pretty well this year. They got their new Kaprizov that's scoring some goals from Russia. So it's been fun to watch. We got a lot of ice in Minnesota, so you got to be a hockey fan.
Right. Right.
That's awesome.
Justin and you could go back and forth on the hockey thing. He was a pretty great hockey player himself. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Playing tonight.
Very nice.
Just men's league. Nothing crazy.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. Do you guys have any other questions before I let him get on with his busy day?
Yeah. Sorry.
I got a million questions, but I think you gave us more than enough value. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Definitely.
And I know the Heartland family is going to love this one. So we'll be back again next week. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Special thanks to Matt Maier for joining us.
Thank
and
you
as
so much.
always, stay healthy with Heartland.